I'm Charity Lighten, here with Kiran, my favorite person to talk to.
Super nerd.
Super nerd, which is why I love his brain so much. I wish I could download it.
And that'll be a lot of scary stuff that comes with it.
Yeah. So it's fun for us just to talk about all these different topics that are kind of affected by the environment and how they affect the microbiome, I should say. And one of those is super hot topic right now is glyphosate.
Yeah.
And as a nutritionist, right, like I'm always turning people towards food.
Right.
Right? Like get your nutrients from food, do the very best you can to fuel yourself properly. But then this word glyphosate starts surrounding. And also I'm learning even the foods that I'm telling people to eat regularly are affected by glyphosate. So you know more of the science behind that. So why don't you kind of tell them a little bit about what glyphosate even is?
Yeah, so, and interestingly enough, people in the health and wellness industry have been really focusing on this and pushing this for almost a decade now, right? But the thing that's really brought it to the forefront was just about, it was over a month ago, the company that invented and uses glyphosate, Monsanto, lost a major lawsuit against a worker who used glyphosate as part of his work.
And it's Roundup.
It's Roundup.
Yeah, Roundup is kind of
a weed killer, herbicide, pesticide. Roundup is a brand name of the one that you use typically around your household and commercial properties. But they use a version of it in basically every crop that's grown in the U.S. And the reason why it's gotten so much attention now is in the wellness industry, there's been a lot of researchers and people of high notoriety that have been pushing this idea that this stuff is toxic, it's carcinogenic, it's on our food. We have no choice to get away from it, especially in the U.S. itself. But that's been fought quite a bit, by the industry. Yeah. The FDA has approved it decades ago. So if the FDA approved it, it must be safe, right? That's the idea behind it. The company has their own research that shows that it's not toxic. But the World Health Organization a number of years ago deemed glyphosate and the components of Roundup as being a probable carcinogen, right? So that was the first big blow to it. Now the World Health Organization, which is the biggest world unbiased authority on health and wellness, deemed this chemical that's found abundantly in all of our foods to be a probable carcinogen. You would think that would get a lot of attention.
Right.
But it didn't, which is crazy. And
many people have still never even heard of glyphosate. Some of you guys might be like Googling it right now, which you should, but when I bring it up there, I've never even heard of it. You're like, well, you will.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, most people don't really pay attention to things unless it's in that 24-hour news cycle nowadays, right? That's just the kind of world we live in. And the reason now it's come up is because a worker who has to use glyphosate for his work has basically developed this rare form of cancer, and it's really aggressive. And he sued the company and won the case where the jury found that there was enough evidence to show that the use and exposure to that chemical caused his cancer. So he won a massive reward, which is a $286 million reward or something crazy like that. So now they're getting the attention, right? So now people are talking about it when there's been decades of studies showing that there's a bunch of issues with it. The saddest part about it is most people who know about glyphosate know that it's used on GMO crops. Right. So what they do, the way they use glyphosate is they've created crops that are resistant to glyphosate, because the way glyphosate works is it interferes with a really important biochemical pathway in plants, and the pathway makes something called aromatic amino acids. These aromatic amino acids are required for the growth and the metabolism of the plant. So glyphosate comes in as a compound and interferes with that capability, and that kills off the plant. So then what they've done is they've gone and taken our crops and did genetic modification so that our crops have a genetic way of working around that problem, and so they can spray the crop. It won't kill the crop, but it will kill the weeds.
And interestingly enough, from what I've studied, it was actually that plant cell pathway that they used to get it approved by the FDA to say, listen, it's only affecting plant cell pathways, not human cell pathways, but the big kicker is the bacteria cell.
Exactly. So it all comes down back to the importance of our bacteria, right? So the pathway is called Shikimate Pathway for those of you that want to research that and be super nerdy about it. But the Shikimate Pathway is a pathway that human cells don't necessarily have. And so their whole premise for safety is that it doesn't affect the human cell because it doesn't interfere with the pathway that the humans use, but it does affect plants. Now, as it turns out, microorganisms also utilize this pathway, and it's a very important pathway for all of the bacteria that live in your gut and on your body. And so when we get exposed to glyphosate on a regular basis, what is happening is we're slowly killing off bacteria. Now, the bad part about it, which actually makes it even worse than any other compound, is that it selectively kills good bacteria. Right? The bacteria that are resistant to the effects of glyphosate in our body are Clostridia, Pseudomonas, Klebsiella, all of these pathogenic bacteria that naturally exist in our body but are typically controlled by the rest of the good bacteria. Now, glyphosate comes in and we eat it every day, every time we eat cereal or snacks or bars, anything that has any agricultural component to it. In fact, oats are the highest, have the highest levels of glyphosate contamination.
You told me that, and there's a part of me that just cried.
Right? It just like dies inside because you go, I made the choice not to eat gluten, so I'm not eating wheat-based cereals. I'm going to eat oatmeal instead. As it turns out, oatmeal has even more. Like the cereal, the kids' cereal that has the highest concentration of glyphosate, about 1,000-fold higher than what is supposed to be the safe level, is Cheerios, because Cheerios is made from oats. Right? And the reason why oats is because they don't use it on oat fields as an herbicide. What they do use it for is just before harvesting. They soak it, right? So they soak the field to dry it out so that it makes it easier to harvest. Just
on that, the water, right? The water, is it a water soluble thing? So it's one thing to have it on the crops, but the other problem too is now it's in our groundwater, right? So even things that are being grown next door,
right,
for example, on a clean farm,
right,
for example, are now exposed to just the groundwater, the toxicity of that from soaking.
Yeah, and the soil, the half-life of glyphosate in the soil is years, right? Mm-hmm. So even if you're growing something, you have a farmer that's now has an organic farm, but he used to grow something that wasn't organic before, and he used glyphosate. All of this stuff that he's growing now in this organic farm, even though he's not actively using glyphosate, still has glyphosate in it. And the thing is, you can't wash it off the vegetables and the fruits and the crops because it gets into the cellular structure of the crops. Yeah. So it's not like you can take it and bring it home and wash it in apple cider vinegar and it goes away. It's inside the structure. Yeah. And it's the worst kind of antibiotic there is because, we all know that taking antibiotics dramatically affects our gut and our microbiome. But antibiotics, what they do is they kill everything, right? And then things start to bounce back. Glyphosate slowly kills all the good bacteria. And eventually allows the bad bacteria to take hold. Now, in our system, in our body, we have the capability of detoxing and getting rid of glyphosate.
Which is amazing, right?
Which is amazing, yeah, that we have that. But there's a good percentage of people that have a SNP. A SNP is like a single nucleotide polymorphism, so they have a mutation in a certain gene. And this might be maybe 15% of the population. That's called a PON1 SNP. And those people can't get rid of glyphosate. Yeah, so it concentrates in fatty tissues and in your glands, so in mammary glands, in your immune glands. And so if you're a mom that's nursing a baby, you might have a high amount of glyphosate in your breast milk that you're giving to the baby. So and this is a carcinogenic antibiotic chemical.
Yeah, and it's so crazy too. Like I was looking at just some studies that showed the timeline of kind of when Roundup and glyphosate kind of entered at least the U.S. market. Yeah. And then there's this crazy correlation with gut issues, but not just that, like brain issues, autism. I mean, there's all these things. We get questions a lot of time, like about the gut and how many people we're seeing now that have these gut issues. It is absolutely not the same ratio that it was 50 years ago.
No, it wasn't at all. And that speaks to everything like gluten intolerance, dairy intolerance, all of those
food
common
sensitivities,
things. Food sensitivities. And those data, which hopefully you can put some of those. I'll send you some of those graphs, and you can put them up on the site itself so people can see it. But the correlations they've basically graphed out over the last 25 years the use of glyphosate on GMO crops, typically soy and wheat. And then the prevalence rate and the incidence rate of diseases. And they've done Alzheimer's, autism, severe infections, Parkinson's, obesity, diabetes, and it matches amazingly. Crazy. And this is 20-something years of data. When you see those graphs, it doesn't take a scientist to understand that, wow, this is driving these conditions, right? Now, here's the bad news. There's a bad news and good news to this, which we've talked about, right? The bad news is even if you're choosing organic, even if you're making healthy choices, studies show now that organic foods contain just as much glyphosate as non-organic foods, as GMO foods, because it's so ubiquitous. It's contaminated everywhere. It's in every soil structure. It's in the groundwater. It's in the air, essentially. So you really can't get away from it, right? So then the question is, well, what do you do about it? So what we've been working on is understanding what glyphosate does in terms of how does it disrupt your microbiome, how does it disrupt your immune system, how does it disrupt your body in general, and then what can we do to undo those disruptions? And that's where probiotics come into play.
And not just any, I mean, we'll talk about this over and over and over on Silverfern, not just any probiotics.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a hard thing, because somebody can go to their big box store and pick up something for $5.99, and it makes me sad, because that's not exactly what you need.
No, it's just a bunch of dead bacteria. I always joke that Americans spend about $36 billion a year on just dead bacteria.
Oh, it makes me, it makes me sad. I was one of those.
Right.
Yeah, I was one of those. Hence, kind of building up Silverfern. You're like, I don't want to spend any more money on stuff that's not going to work.
Yeah, and the thing is, probiotics have such promise. Yeah. But the vast majority of it is not done with any sort of scientific rationale behind it. Yeah. Most of it is kind of these kitchen sink formulas where they're just kind of throwing a bunch of strains in it.
And we see those all over.
And we see them all over. And these probiotic companies kind of pop up overnight. Yeah. Because they know it's a quick buck, right? Yeah. Because probiotics are hot, digestive health is hot. Right. So it's very easy to just kind of throw together a probiotic product, do some fancy labeling, fancy marketing, and do a lot of sales overnight online. Yeah. That's what people are doing.
Which is exactly what we did not do.
Right. Exactly, yes.
It's like, what strains will actually go in? Right. What has the science taught us? And I've learned so much from you too, just about, I'll show you this one study or this or this or this, and you're like, look at the dosage, or look at this, or look at this, and this wasn't combined with this, and how do you know they're not competing against each other? Right. And luckily we have people like you that go, these are the strains that we need. Yeah. Here's what we've learned from science, and here's what we believe it will do in the body, and we've got proof to show that. So,
and it's some of the most important things. Like, there a lot of probiotic studies companies, when they do research, which rarely do they do any research, 99% of probiotic products on the market have no studies on them, right? On the probiotics or on the strains itself.
Or even the dosage, right?
Or the dosage,
Here's 50 billion. You're like, there's not studies on that.
Right, so why 50 billion? Yeah. Is it better than 10? Yeah. Do you have a study to show that it is, right? So what is the efficacious dose? Or is that just marketing? And typically it's just marketing. But when they do studies, it's typically on gas and bloating, and that's important. But what we're really fighting against here is the toxic world that we live in, right? Yeah. That's what's killing people. Yeah. That's what's hurting families. That's what's hurting individuals. Right? Your family,
my family.
You are living it right now, right? Yeah. And it's the toxic world that's doing that. Yeah. And our focus is, how do we use microbes, beneficial, unique microbes, to undo some of that damage that we're doing because of the toxic world we live in? And we can't get away from the world, right? You're not going to move to a side of a mountain somewhere and grow your own food and forage. You might actually just...
No, I won't. No, you're right. And people at home are kind of going, well, this is terrible, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been in the same situation with my own family, my husband with cancer, all that stuff. It's overwhelming, it's daunting. Mm-hmm. But the message from a food standpoint, right? Like I like to study food as much as he likes to study bugs. Mm-hmm. From a food standpoint, I still don't want people to stop eating fruits and vegetables. Right? I don't want them to stop eating the grains. I mean, you could talk about meat supply, right? What's being fed to them, the GMO corn and all these other things. So I don't want them to stop, especially fiber being so important, which we'll do a whole other thing about fiber. It's like, do the best that you can with the information that you have. Luckily, the body does have an ability to detoxify itself, and giving yourself, I call it like a shield. The probiotic that I take every day, I'm like, okay, this is at least a shield somewhat against this crazy toxic world that we live in. It's empowering to be like, okay. And I mean, I love the testimonies that we get from people when they're like, I've never felt better, or like in 7 days, I've noticed a difference. And so it's kind of one of those ways for us to at least fight back a little bit against this industry. I'm going to Monsanto. I'm going to say it. Normally I wouldn't, but it's like, for us to fight back a little bit.
Yeah. And this gives you a little bit of empowerment, right? Because as an individual, what can you do against the forces that be, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to affect legislation in any major way. You're not going to be able to go to the government and say, hey, ban this chemical and somehow clean it up. We could try. We will try. There are a lot of people that are, but even if they stop using it today, it would take 10 years for it to get rid of it outside of our environment. So we're going to be consuming it for at least another 10 more years after they stop using it, right? So we can't get away from it. And if we can't get away from it, what can we do about undoing the types of damage that it does? That's what we're studying, and we're doing studies on that nobody else is doing right now. And I think a lot of it is because they don't have the strains that can actually do anything about it.
Which is key, right?
Which is key,
I mean, the amount of strains, we don't even know all of the strains,
Right.
but there are some that we know can outperform other strains.
Right.
And that's what you and your research team are working on.
It's very strain specific. So what we've done is we're
Can
not...
I give them a little peek?
Yeah.
Like, can you guys imagine that you could open a capsule of probiotics, put it in water, and spray it in your own garden?
Right.
Right?
Isn't that crazy? So let's say you're making the choice to grow some of your own food because you understand that growing your own food in your backyard to some degree, of course you're not going to grow all your food, but even growing some of your produce, some of your fruits yourself will dramatically reduce your exposure to big agricultural products that have tons of glyphosate on it. But what you maybe don't realize is that the soil that you buy in order to build your garden is loaded with glyphosate already. So even your own natural garden, whether you do it as a biodynamic, organic type of garden, will have glyphosate on it. But one of the strains that we work with that's in the product, in the Silver Fern product, has been shown to be able to break down glyphosate in the soil.
So
right? That's amazing that a bacteria has this capability to take this carcinogenic antimicrobial chemical, severely toxic chemical, and break it down and render it ineffective, which is amazing. So what I do in my garden, I open up the capsule, mix a couple capsules in water, and I sprayed my garden with that water before we started growing anything. And that makes a huge difference. Now, it can also undo the damage in the gut, because we know of the types of damage that these chemicals cause within the gut. They basically cause a massive shift in the population of your bacteria. You end up with higher levels of Clostridia, higher levels of Klebsiella, lower levels of Lactobacillus, Bifidobacter, and all those.
These are good ones.
These are good ones, right? So the bad ones get to flourish because of this unique environment that this chemical causes, and the good ones diminish over time. Now, what's interesting is the specific bad ones that do well in the presence of glyphosate are also correlated with kids who have autism, with kids who are on the spectrum of some sort, who have ADD or ADHD, with adults who have Alzheimer's, with cardiovascular disease, with obesity. These are the same bacteria.
I asked him yesterday, I'm like, how do we know this? He's like, there's so much literature out there.
So much literature.
They know this.
Right. And most people would never see or understand this literature. You have to be a super nerd who reads hundreds and hundreds of research papers a month and dig into this, right? And those studies are all out there, and it's very clear that there's a certain characteristic population of bacteria within the digestive tracts of people that suffer from chronic illness. We know that. And now we've found an agent that facilitates that change. Yeah. So our question is, we can't get away from that agent. Can we put something in that brings back the balance, right? All of that nonsense probiotic stuff, all of that stuff is just dying through your stomach. There is no point on taking many of those products because you're just spending your money on dead bacteria. And as salesy as that sounds, this is coming purely from a scientific perspective.
Right.
As
Which
somebody,
is what I love about you.
Yeah, somebody who's a microbiologist, I'm seeing people going out there and spending their money on things that they think are helping them. And this is their hard-earned money. They're working hard for it, and it's doing nothing. Right? When there are bacteria that can get in there and really make a dramatic change, which can change your life. It can change your loved one's life. It can alleviate some of the things that you're going through in your own personal life, right?
So my husband has stage 4 cancer. I mean, I've mentioned this video, in other videos I've mentioned. So it's a very personal thing where you're it is crucial that we figure out a way to get this balance back, that your good bacteria, which the amount of functions that are reliant upon a healthy balance of good bacteria is crazy. I mean, we'll do a few other videos about what your body is affected by. But yeah, so it's just really, really, for me, it's empowering and encouraging to go, there are things in nature. Like these are not chemically made spores, but these spore bacteria are from nature.
They are, yeah.
And in some ways, I'm like, it's just, I don't know. It brings me back more faith. Like, I believe a lot of things on the earth are designed to heal us anyway.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And so,
I mean, there's, we know herbs and plants and foods, all these things that have tremendous medicinal qualities to it. And I can guarantee you, I'm not smart enough to create the kind of bacteria that we're talking about here. Neither are any scientists in the world today. They can try, and they probably have tried for decades. I'll give you a great example of that: mother's milk. Right?
Yeah.
It's the only mammalian food that's been perfected by evolution. Women still produce breast milk because it's the most critical food for babies. It's what humans need when we're first born in order to establish our microbiome, our immune system, give them the right components for growth, for cognitive development, everything. A baby, we know if they're not breastfed, there's data now that shows that they have an increasing risk for all kinds of long-term diseases just because they weren't breastfed enough, right? But big companies, pharmaceutical companies and multinational companies have been trying to mimic mother's milk for centuries. They have spent billions of dollars trying to create infant formula to try to match what nature has created. They can't do it. There isn't an infant formula today that matches mother's milk. Mother's milk has 600 different species of bacteria in it. Mother's milk has over 200 different prebiotic oligosaccharides in it. Nobody can recreate that in a laboratory, right? So we can't have the arrogance that we can somehow outsmart nature and overtake what nature's already provided. My job is to try to be just smart enough to understand what nature has provided and harness that power. And then study it.
And then prove it, right?
Prove it, You can't make that assumption. We try not to make any assumptions as if you're taking a scientific methodology to things. What we've done is we've looked at bacteria that we know can survive through the gastric system, which in itself is key. And most bacteria, because the gastric system, most people don't know, the stomach acid is so corrosive, it's so potent, it kills virtually everything.
Which we want it to.
We want it to. It's part of the immune system. It's called a gastric barrier because that's its major job, is to kill stuff that's coming in. And it's so acidic that if you were able to put your finger in your stomach acid, it would burn off your fingertips, right? That's how corrosive it is. Now imagine a bacteria that's designed itself to be able to survive through that corrosive environment. And it does. So it survives through there. It survives through the small intestine, which is where you get all the bile salts. Bile salts are also really powerful antimicrobials. It survives that, gets into the gut, and comes out of the shell that it put itself in to protect itself.
Those are the spores. So look for a spore-forming probiotic, right?
That's really
Sporebiotics.
Sporebiotics, I mean, forget the whole idea of probiotic. Look for sporebiotic because these are the ones that have been designed by nature to make it through that passage. So in our view, okay, if they have this unique capability of making it through this passage, there must be a reason for them to have that capability, right? So let's study what they do in the gut. And as it turns out, a lot of other smarter people have already studied a lot of this because they've been used in the pharmaceutical industry in Europe, Asia, and Latin America since 1952, right? So we just started working off of their work, but we wanted to dig in deeper of how do these spores actually affect the rest of the flora. Because we know the world we live in, including the glyphosate that we consume, creates this really bad shift in the flora over time, right? When I say flora, I mean the microbial population. The technical word for it is microbiota. So microbiota is what we're talking about. Because flora and fauna, if there's any biologist watching this, they'll go, this is not plants. Flora and fauna refer to plant animal species. But most people recognize the word flora for the gut, so that's the term I use. But what we know is that our lives in the Western world create this dysbiosis. This dysbiosis is correlated to a significant number of chronic illnesses, and we wanted to see, can these spores going in, can they shift this dysbiosis? So we were just talking about it. We're excited to be publishing a paper. And we do. Just until I have to fly out. Then it's like, planes. And so we are publishing a paper for the first time showing a probiotic that can actually go in and shift the balance in the microbiota. So actually bringing down the bad guys, dramatically increasing the good guys. Not only that, increasing the diversity of species that actually exist in the microbiota. And then in particular, increasing the growth of things we call keystone strains. So these are really important strains within the microbiota that hold up the rest of the population. And we could talk about evidence on the keystone strains, which is, there's a really interesting study out there. But we're submitting that paper for publication because we've shown that putting these spores in, they regulate the rest of the environment and the population. So we call that the reconditioning of the microbiome to favor the growth of the good guys and suppress the growth of the bad guys, and then increase the diversity and then bring up these keystone strains that hold up the rest of the population. That is specifically the undoing of what the toxic world we live in does to our system.
And I love that there are things in nature that have the capabilities of doing that.
Right, and it's
that they
fascinating.
were here, that we found them, and now we're studying them, and now we're going, how does this affect the body? And I mean, we could talk about this topic forever. It's just something that, you know, for you guys out there, it's just to be aware of. I mean, when I was studying and I was learning, you go through that. For me, it was rage. Yeah. Right? And like, how could we have done this? Right. Right? How are we doing this? Cancer's on the rise. All of these diseases are on the rise, and they're affecting our families. Like, it seems criminal. Like, I feel myself getting emotional. Right? Where
and you should.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because the problem with it is, most of these things were done for profit. Yeah. Without consideration of what the impact is on people and on families. Yeah. Right? More and more frequently people are giving birth to kids who are on the spectrum. That's a very difficult life for many parents. You know, that is people who are not going to be, you know, functioning at their optimal capacity because of an environmental issue. Yeah. Yeah. Right? More and more kids are developing asthma. Asthma is actually a pandemic right now. And if you look at the mortality rate for kids with asthma over the last 4 or 5 years, it is sickening. There's no reason a kid should be dying from asthma, right? That is a very preventable, treatable condition. And a lot of it starts with the environment that they're born into, right? I always explain to people that we have to stop thinking of a human the way we see a human, right? So we see a human as a collection of organ systems connected by neurons and vessels and connective tissue and so on. But a human is actually something called a holobiome. A holobiome translates to mean a superorganism. We are a walking, talking rainforest, right? We are an ecology in itself. And so our system is actually made up of thousands of different organisms that live in little microecologies that have to work together and communicate together in order to perpetuate the health of the whole. We now know, with a good amount of evidence, that the vast majority of chronic diseases come about because we disrupt our ecology in some way or the other, right? Whether it's a single chemical or a type of bad food or single course of antibiotics, all of these things, or the water in your local area with chlorine and fluoride in it, pollution in the air, right? Yeah. All of these things that we do to disrupt this ecology leads to disease. And so what we've done is we've basically evolved to be this amazing holobiome, the superorganism, and we've taken this being and put it in the absolute worst environment for it to flourish. Right, which is an antimicrobial toxic environment.
And the cool thing is that this ecology that you've just described so well was designed to interact with this world.
With everything, yes.
Right? Yeah. That we could benefit from, and we've isolated, we've put these barriers, and all these things that kind
That's such an important message because one thing for people to realize is we're in constant osmosis with the world around us, right? We are putting things out that other cells and living organisms utilize, and then we are absorbing in things that they provide that we need for our function as well.
It's fascinating.
And we are exchanging things with one another as well. So, you know, like I meet a lot of moms who are very focused and dedicated on making sure their kids are healthy. So they're giving them the supplements and vitamins and giving them good food, but they're not really taking care of themselves as well because they're so engrossed in that service of their children and their families. But the problem is we share a collective microbiome, right? There was a fascinating study that I saw presented at a microbiome conference where I was presenting, and the talk after me was actually this researcher that had completed a study where he took individuals that had a course of antibiotics, right? So then from the day they started their antibiotics, he followed them for 6 months. And over the course of 6 months, he was measuring their microbiome to see what was the change that the antibiotic caused to the microbiome, and for how long could he measure that negative change. And he stopped at 6 months, but he showed with abundant clarity that for 6 months he could see that same dysbiotic change from that single course of antibiotics. Now that's not the surprising part, because there were other studies that show that up to 2 years you can still be affected by a single course of antibiotics. What was fascinating about his study is he also followed the microbiomes of people that lived in the same household that did not take the antibiotic.
No way.
And he found that those people had the same negative change, same negative dysbiosis, even though they didn't take the antibiotic, they lived with the person that did. Right? So we exchange bacteria all the time in a household. I'll give you one fun, gross example
pets.
of that.
When people have pets, there's a different, right?
Absolutely. There's a different microbiome. And in fact, studies show that households with dogs, like you have your
Mine's
lovely
right
dog
there.
right there, have kids with lower incidence rate of allergies and asthma and all that.
So
dogs are great inside-outside animals. They go out, they bring all of these microbes in, and they spread it around the house, which is really important. If you have your windows open a few times throughout the day, that enhances your own microbiome. A lot of people will say, well, how do we exchange microbes and with each other? Now, of course, if you're non-platonic partners, you can imagine how. But he also followed platonic people who were roommates who didn't have any sort of biological exchange, and they still had similar microbiomes, similar changes in the microbiome. Now, one example of that is toilets, right? So when you go poop, you flush the toilet. Just the vortex in the flushing process aerosolizes fecal samples out into
people
the air.
People are cringing right now.
Right.
But
Imagine,
you need to know this
You need to know this. Poop droplets are going up into your air, getting sucked into your air system, and blown back out to you. So no matter how well you think you clean your house, and you shouldn't be trying to sterilize your house, because that's another problem. You've got each other's poop droplets all over the place, and you are consuming them. It's on your skin. It's everywhere. 90% of the matter in dust is human cells.
Interesting.
Right? So household dust, if you don't dust for a couple of days, you swipe your finger on the surface, you see all of this matter. 90% of it is actually human cells that make up that physical matter, right? So we're shedding our cells, it's going into our system. Our cells contain our bacteria, our DNA, all that stuff. So we're communicating with one another in ways we don't even know about, and we affect one another. So health comes from a community. If you're in a household and you're trying to make yourself healthier, the thing that's going to hold you back is the other people in the house that aren't living the same kind of healthy lifestyle.
My teenagers.
Yes, exactly. So they're out there doing whatever they do, right?
Yeah.
But it's hard to get them to take. For example, if you're going to use a probiotic like the Silver Fern product to improve your microbiota, it's better to make sure that you get everybody in the household to do it as well, because you're all sharing microbes.
Yeah.
Right? So if you've got 3 people in the household that aren't doing it and continue to have dysbiotic flora, but you're trying to do it, then it's like every 2 steps you take forward, you get 1 step back, because you're sharing microbes with the others. So it's got to be a community thing. Everyone's got to try to do it together to improve the health.
Okay, I've got this nagging voice right here that I just want to bring up something real quick, because I can see my sweet friend who's 3 adopted kids, and I can see her watching it and be like, I didn't breastfeed, like, their gut, like, what control do I have? So the good thing is, well, babies and children can take probiotics.
Yep. And they should.
And they should. Now, be careful which ones they take, right? Like, these ones are science-based. I'm not saying just go find one on the shelf, right? Look for ones that have been studied and tested. So even those babies can be changed for good.
Right.
You know, of course we want people to breastfeed. Of course we do. But there are scenarios, like I can just see her right now. She's like, so what do I do? Like,
right.
Still solutions out there.
Still solutions. I mean, one of the study we did that I talked about earlier, just from adding the spores, we're seeing a doubling of the diversity. So those bacteria, the good bacteria, are there, because even if you didn't breastfeed, the child got some exposure to them from whoever was raising them when they were first born, right? And whether it was just a skin-to-skin contact, the process of birthing through the vaginal canal, or if they were a C-section, after the C-section, just a close contact with mom and dad, kissing, holding, whatever it may be, they pick up all of those bacteria. The problem is those beneficial bacteria are at such low levels that they're ineffective.
They need to be built up.
They need to be built up. And so they're there. They are there to some degree. A lot of people come to me and go, "Oh, I've had so many courses of antibiotics. There's no way I have any good bacteria." I'm like, "Well, you'd be dead if you didn't have any good bacteria. You have to have them.
Yeah.
They're there, but their population just
which is cool
ineffective.
too, right? If you've got one of these illnesses, so strep throat for me, like I had it when I was 17. Thought it was going to kill me.
Right.
And then antibiotics came in. I was like, this is definitely times.
Of course, you need
right,
antibiotics.
You need it. So I love that there's still solutions. Like they're still there. You just got to build them back.
Build them back up.
And I'm going to go back to food for just 1 second because studies do show biodiversity of your microbiome is really, really critical. And there are things that you can do by increasing the variety of plant food that you eat, right? Get a big variety. Try your kids tasting different things. I mean, sometimes it takes a while. They say sometimes it takes 7 times for your kid to taste something before they've kind of developed that taste bud for it. So there are things that you can do. You don't need to feel like we're helpless in this. It is a toxic world. By no means, don't take that lightly. It is a toxic world, but there are things that we can do. And,
which is the good news about it.
And to me, a probiotic's the simplest one to do.
It is, absolutely, because that's something that doesn't necessarily interfere with your life in any major way. It's taking a capsule a day. That's it. That's
or for your kids, open it up
and mix it in
and mix it in their drink. They can do that.
Or for your spouses that may not be into it as much, spike it into their drink, into their little juices and things like that they
Here's
won't even
your
know it's
smoothie,
in there.
honey.
Right, exactly. Here's your hamburger. You put it between the bun and the meat, they would have no idea. And it survives all of that, which is amazing, right?
Yeah, amazing.
It can survive through stomach acids. It can survive a lot of stuff. But the food part is really important. I mean, the studies show that our ancestors ate 600 to 800 different types of foods annually.
Amazing.
Right? Because they were hunters, gatherers. They dug for roots and tubers and so on. They ate seeds and nuts, whatever they could find. And they also ate seasonally, which there is a seasonal cycling of the microbiome. A healthy Westerner maybe eats 20 different foods. So we've really shrunk.
And those are the non-picky ones.
Those are non-picky ones. Yeah, most people eat 6-7 different types of foods. Now, one of the ways I always recommend to people about increasing your diversity of your diet is to go to like an ethnic grocery store. Like if you go to a Korean grocery store, a Middle Eastern one, you'll find vegetables and roots and tubers that you don't see at your regular Whole Foods or other grocery stores you typically go to.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you don't have to eat a lot of it. It's about eating just a little bit of a lot of different things. So you don't have to buy this strained squash that you find at the Korean grocery store and figure out how to make a dish out of it, right? You just have to chop it up and steam it or saute it and eat a small amount of it.
Right.
And do that on a regular basis. Just add in something new each week, and it gives you that kind of diversity, that ability to build up your microbiota.
For some people, it could even just be like, just eat the broccoli.
Right.
They're like, I'm not going to any sort of ethnic store. Okay, just eat the things that your grandma told you to be eating anyway.
Totally, yeah. Like some people, you can ask this question to almost everybody. You can say, what's your favorite vegetable? And everyone has one or two that they like, and they don't really eat anything else. Yeah. And they think, because I eat these two, that's my vegetable, right? Well, it's not true, because the molecular structure of these vegetables have different effects in your body than all the other vegetables. So you do need to eat a variety of them if you can. Yeah. And again, you don't have to eat a lot of it. That's the part that is daunting to people, because they go, I don't know how to cook with all of these different vegetables, and I don't know what to do. Just chop it up, and my wife makes something she calls like a garbage salad or something like that. So she pulls all these random crazy things from the garden and just chops it all up, throws it in a bowl, and puts a little vinaigrette kind of thing on it. And it's delicious, and it's just a little bit of
garbage salad for
garbage salad time.
Yeah, or worst case, throw something in a smoothie, right? Like, just
absolutely.
a little bit, something different.
Something different.
So I like talking about the food aspect too, and
which is so important.
Such an important.
You're not going to solve your problems with just a capsule. We know that. You have to do other lifestyle changes as well. The capsule will be a really important first start, and then you start building on that with all the lifestyle changes, which is really where you'll achieve real health and wellness and be able to reverse all of the toxic damage that's been done. Now, here's the other piece of good news. Now that we know that a vast majority of chronic illnesses have something to do with an ecological change in our body, because it's an ecological change, we can change the ecology and thereby change the outcome of the condition.
And how fast can we do it?
The beauty of it, our study in changing the microbiota was 3 weeks.
I love it.
That's the beauty of microbes. It doesn't take a very long period of time. Now, you can change the microbiota quick, but then the physiological changes in your condition might take longer. but you know you can start making those positive changes in a very short amount of time by just making the right decisions. And that's so important to know, because we used to think, this was back in 2000, we used to think that every disease we suffered from had a gene in our chromosomes that caused the disease, right? That's why they did the Human Genome Project to try to map out the entire human genome. The assumption was everything we suffer from, we'd find a gene and then we'd somehow manipulate the gene and that disease is gone. As it turns out, we have very few genes in our chromosome. We are really primitive when it comes to our own DNA. We've got about 22,000 functional genes in our chromosome.
Less than a rice plant and an
rice
earthworm.
plant. Exactly. So our rice plant has 40,000. So we are half as sophisticated and cool as a rice plant or earthworm. And the question always is, well, how is it we're at the top of the evolutionary ladder and food chain? It's because we have 3.5 million bacterial genes in our system.
We outsource.
That's true.
To bacteria.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I actually will argue from an evolutionary biology standpoint that the reason the human being, the Homo sapiens sapien, got to where we did is we were a species that was smart enough to incorporate enough of the environment into our system, right? And we, like you said, we've outsourced so many functionalities. A great example of that is just how we eat. We are essentially omnivores, right? Humans can eat almost anything. We can eat plants, we can eat meats, we can eat seeds, we can eat roots and tubers, we can eat all kinds of crazy stuff. There are many animals in the animal kingdom that are obligate carnivores or obligate herbivores. Take a lion, for example. A lion is an obligate carnivore. If there's no gazelle and things to hunt because of a drought, a lion can't go and eat a plant. Right, the lion will get sick. Its body can't utilize it. Gorillas are the opposite, or the ruminant animals that the lion hunts are the opposite. They are obligate herbivores. They have to eat plants. So if there's a drought, those guys die off. Then the lion's food source die off, and they all suffer. A human, if our primary food source is gone, we can go dig in the ground and eat an insect. You know, we can eat termites, we can eat seeds, we can eat roots.
When I get on Survivor, I'm going to do that.
Yes, and you will survive. You'll be the only one with a healthy, diverse microbiome. Everyone else
it's fascinating, right?
Sick.
We can do that.
We can do that, and we've done that. We came, from starting from being in the trees and being able to go from the trees into the ground and being nomadic. We pick up a lot of microbes from all over the environment. And that ability to pick up microbes from all over the environment has allowed us to build this really diverse ecology that gives us so many different functionalities, right? Another great example of that is seaweed. Okay, so seaweed is a very unique type of carbohydrate structure that we cannot digest. We don't make the enzyme to break down seaweed, nor do any of our bacteria in our gut. However, in Japanese populations that eat a lot of sushi, so they eat a lot of seaweed and they eat a lot of raw fish, they figured out that the Japanese population has microbes in their gut that have picked up the ability to make an enzyme called beta porphyrinase, which actually breaks down seaweed. Where did they pick this up from? From the fish that they eat, right? So fish have this enzyme because the fish eat seaweed. Now, the Japanese people eat a lot of fish, and so because they eat a lot of fish, their bacteria picked up that gene from fish that's moving through their system, and now they have bacteria that can break down seaweed. If you eat enough sushi for 6 months, you'll have the same effect.
Yes.
Right? It's so amazing to think that our bodies can adapt that way in a way that we don't even realize and we don't even understand. But typically when you eat seaweed, if you can't break it down, it's just going to pass through. You're not going to pull all the amazing nutrients that are in it. But Japanese populations do pull all of the amazing nutrients from it because their microbes picked up that ability from fish.
Well, it's like we were talking about too. Different regions of populations have a different microbiome, right? The food that grows there, we were talking about coconut specifically, right? That doesn't grow where I live. And that there is a difference in populations, but that we can evolve and adapt our gut to kind of, it's fascinating to me. Just more proof that we are this ecosystem of our bodies individually, collectively, and then with nature.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you think about, there's great examples of this, like Inuit Indians. Inuit Indians live primarily on a diet of seal fat, right? If any one of us went and spent even 3 days eating their diet, we would be sick, we would lose weight, we'd probably get gut infections, we'd have nonstop diarrhea. We can't do it. because they've evolved through generations to consume that. Their microbiomes have actually adapted to consuming that kind of really unique diet. So there's lots of those examples all over the world. And another really interesting example is when you look at the current hunter-gatherer tribes that still live the way our ancestors lived. So they were hunters and gatherers, and they went out with hunting parties every once in a while. And it's important to note that hunter-gatherers, even though the word hunter is first, they didn't hunt primarily, they gathered primarily, right?
I love that you say that, because I cringe a little bit when I hear these things. I'm like, they did a lot of gathering.
They did mostly gathering because hunting was very energy intensive. It was dangerous. They would often get hurt, and they didn't have modern medicine at the time. So you get stuck by an animal and you're going to die from an infection very quickly. And so they gathered mostly, and then they hunted occasionally. But when they did hunt, and it was typically a delicacy for them when they did hunt, right? So if you look at the Hazara tribe in Tanzania, one of the things they still hunt is porcupine. That's one of their delicacies that they love, right? Delicious porcupine, if you can imagine. So then there's a small hunting party that goes out when they're ready to go hunt a porcupine, and then they'll capture and kill a porcupine. One of the first things they do when they kill the animal is they slit open its belly and its intestines and eat the intestinal contents right there on the spot. Those that go out hunting know from centuries of doing this that gives them some sort of health and virility. Now, what's interesting, if you look at the hunter-gatherer tribes in places like Papua New Guinea, when they go and hunt boars and the other things that they hunt, they do the same thing. When they kill an animal, they slit open the intestines and they eat the contents. I can assure you with great certainty, these two tribes did not send each other emails saying, hey dude, I came up with a cool new thing, eat the intestines, right? These are independent types of people in different parts of the world that have developed this technique together and separately. But the reason why they developed it is because that's intuition. Right, most of how we survive through the course of history is through intuition, right? Our gut feeling, or what our bacteria is telling us to do.
And the results, right? If they died right then, they're like, oh, we're going to do that again.
Right, I'm not going to do that again.
All of a sudden, they're like, they've got this vitality or whatever. Yeah, they learn.
They learn, and they go, wow, this is
That's
something
what makes
important.
humans different than other species.
Totally, we have that capability to adapt and learn.
Yeah.
So doing that, what they find, what you think about it now from a modern scientific standpoint is they are catching ruminant animals that are running around and picking up microbes from all over the place. What they're doing is giving themselves a huge dose of probiotics of these environmental spore type of bacteria that the animal has gone out and gotten for them from all over the, some of these animals are ruminant through, 100 square miles of space, right? And they burrow and they dig in, so they find bacteria that are deep in the earth, and they bring them back out and they swallow them, and then these hunters are getting all of that benefit from one dose, right? So they understand that and they develop that. So that's how important this kind of oneness and intimate connection with the outside world is, which is exactly what we've done again, what we've built against, because we put ourselves in these jungles and all that.
I don't eat porcupine. I've never had intestine. But in all seriousness, I don't even play in the dirt. Right? It's one of the things that I'm not even really exposing myself to the things that are right there and easily accessible.
That are important. And so what we've done is try to make it simple and easier, and we've gone out and found what is the most important in the dirt, like these spore-based organisms, and bring it to you, because in the modern world we need things that are easy and convenient, right? So we're not going to go eat dirt. We'll bring the most active components of this dirt into a product. But again, we have to study it, right? We're not making the assumption that these things are beneficial. I mean, I'm doing 11 clinical trials right now on probiotics, and we just finished 5 of them, which we're submitting for publication. We have 6 others going on. That's the most probiotic research anybody's doing. Nobody's studying probiotic products. There are researchers studying individual strains. Nobody's studying combination products and looking at impactful endpoints like things associated with chronic illness. So that's really important. So, but again, all we've done is harness what nature's already given us. We're not going out there trying to recreate the wheel. Nature's already done that for us. We're just smart enough to take that wheel and use it.
Yeah. And I love with you, I'm like, well, okay, can we put 25 billion in ours, right? Because we all feel like, I don't know, sometimes we feel like the need to compete with what's out there.
More is better.
And you'll say to me, that's not. Why is more better? We haven't studied that. Show me one study that shows that is beneficial.
Right.
And then I'm like, okay.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's cool to me. It's cool to me to think, as daunting and sad as the reality of the toxic environment is. Like, that's sad to me. Like, it kind of is depressing. Yeah. But I love human innovation. I love technology. I love the science. I love that we go, you know what? We're going to learn how to beat this.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to learn how to come above it. We're better than this. Yeah. And there's tools that we now are learning through science that help.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
You know, and
foods that help. I mean, there's science and there's nature, and I love using both of them.
Foods and behaviors too, like things like fasting, right? That's something easy anyone can incorporate. You know, no one can make money off of fasting, which is great. So everyone can do it. It's not like we're selling you a fasting book or something that. We should. I'm just kidding. Why would we do that? Yeah. But just just stop eating for a period of time. That has such huge amounts of health benefits that it's hard to calculate almost, and there's so many studies behind it. You know,
I think that's another intuitive thing.
Right.
Like, I feel like there's certain things that are intuitive that the science catches up to later.
Right.
It's like, oh yeah, I always kind of felt like it makes sense, you know, from dinner to breakfast to just give your body that rest. And now science goes, wow, it's not just rest, it's tremendous benefit.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, like, for example, we've always known that stress is bad for you in some way, right? But well before we ever had the biochemical capability to prove how stress is actually harms your body, we knew intuitively that stress is bad. And we knew that meditation, relaxation, all that kind of stuff, that you know, seeking some sort of nirvana with, whether it's a higher power or with one another, was really important, because most cultures in the world have some component of that in their culture, right? Some ability to kind of downshift your emotions and downshift your mentality and kind of ground yourself and become more in this Zen-like state. And there's so many different ways of achieving that. For me, it's about going to the spa, you know, getting massage, getting pampered a little bit. And here's the thing, I've always known that that's beneficial to me. Now there's studies to show what happens. So when you get a massage, so a 30-minute massage with oil increases oxytocin levels by 23%.
Okay, I knew it was something, because I'm like, this just feels so good.
Right? And there's a lasting effect. So it bumps up oxytocin levels by 23%. Oxytocin is one of the most important longevity hormones in the body. That's one of the things we're missing in this modern disconnected world, because oxytocin comes from interaction with other people. So that's the first hormone that mom and baby share together to create that mom-baby bond that you almost never break the rest of your life. And then giving someone a hug, like, I'm a hugger. When I see people, I like to give them a hug, because that actually increases your oxytocin. Complimenting somebody else actually increases your own oxytocin. So simple things like that, things that we knew were beneficial, now we have a biochemical explanation for why it's good. When oxytocin goes up, stress hormones actually go down. They work antagonistically. So we know that there are longevity benefits to that. But I've been doing regular massage since I was 18 in high school. But I knew that was something that was really good for me, and it was a way for me to kind of bring down my energy levels and ground myself.
Why don't you talk a little bit too about stress and the microbiome?
Absolutely. So there's many different ways we can affect the bacteria that live in our gut, right? And in our system as well. So one of the things that stress does, for one, is increase the leakiness of the gut. So stress creates inflammation that actually opens up the junctions, the tight junctions in the gut.
Okay, I'm going to use non-science terms for tight junctions.
Yeah.
So I always had this kind of impression that my gut was this seamless hose, and upon further inspection, you realize that there's these kind of cells that keep your intestine together, right? And those are the tight junctions that he's talking about. And when those open up, all of a sudden you've got this leaky gut.
Yeah, and it's a space in between the cells. That's what the tight junction refers to. Now, what's interesting about tight junctions, imagine your intestinal lining, which is really the thing that separates the outside toxic world from your inside, your blood, right? Because once it goes past the intestinal lining, it has full access to your blood.
Yeah, probably our most protective feature of our entire body is that lining. Yeah, that protects
And it's only one cell thick.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Right? It's a single cell thick. It's these cells, I call them like soldier cells, sitting next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, and they're creating this barrier all throughout, from your mouth all the way to your bottom. And the thing is, the spaces between them are supposed to open when you eat food and nutrients, or some certain nutrients are supposed to go through that space, but then they're supposed to be able to close back again and remain shut for most of the time so that toxins and bacteria and viruses and all that don't sneak through. When your gut is leaky, that means that whole system is not functioning. There's too much inflammation in this area. It remains open and things just literally leak through into your blood and can be measured. So stress opens up those tight junctions and creates leakiness in the gut. That leakiness in the gut has long-term effects because the types of inflammation that leakiness in the gut creates is the exact type of inflammation that starts heart disease, diabetes, most forms of cancer, Alzheimer's, all kinds of aging-related disorders. We know that. There's significant evidence for that. We also know that when your body releases epinephrine, norepinephrine, all these kind of stress hormones, it actually increases the growth and virulence of pathogenic bacteria and viruses that live in your body. So for some reason, we don't exactly know why, but those types of organisms flourish when you have an overexpression of stress hormones. So not only are you making your gut leaky and more inflamed, you're causing systemic inflammation, the kind of systemic inflammation that drives chronic illness, but you're also giving rise to more pathogenic and unfavorable organisms. All of that just from being stressed, you know? So I always tell people that, you know, of course you could take things like the spores and the probiotic to undo that leakiness, because that's one of the papers we published last year showing that it can seal up the gut in 30 days.
Science, not just us going, hey, take this, it will help. Like proven science.
This is double-blind, placebo-controlled university study published in a major gastroenterology journal, and it was published as a frontier paper because no other studies have shown any sort of compound, prescription or natural, to actually seal up the leakiness in the gut. But of course, you can't just seal that up and continue being stressful and, you know, honking at people when you drive to work and things like that. You need to bring your stress levels down as well. That's where the lifestyle component comes in handy. So it needs to be all done at once. Now, the other thing is that all of this stuff impacts us from day one, right? What is the most important feature, capability of a human, and that is giving birth, creating other humans, right? Our ability to pass on our genetic material, create other humans, is how our species will last and propagate. Fertility is one of the most important things to the lasting capability of our species. We now know that fertility is dramatically impacted by the health of your microbiome. Yeah,
like when you were telling me that, it makes sense to me, but I get frustrated, I get angry, because you're like, I've got good friends that suffer from fertility, and then you kind of go, oh wow, there's also a chemical right now, completely legal in our country.
Right.
Other countries have been wiser, completely legal in our country, that is killing our gut.
Yeah.
And that affects fertility. Like, it's crazy.
It affects our ability to be human. That's the most human thing as a mammal is to create another human, reproduce. And if we're impacting that in such a negative way, we're basically shutting off a very basic function that has propagated our species over the course of the years. And that's a very emotional and difficult thing too, right? If you have fertility issues, if you're suffering from infertility, that's a very difficult thing for a woman and her partner and all to go through, because it's a fundamental aspect of being a human. You want to create progeny. Which is a fancy word for kids.
But I feel like almost now you could say, like, I can see them in front of me, and you want to like put my arms around these girlfriends of mine and be like, this wasn't your fault.
No, because
and somebody that don't know that, like they don't understand, they don't feel like a woman, and you're like, it's not your fault.
Right.
And I think that's an important message for a lot of them here. And what some people will go, this is too far of a disconnect. Let me just maybe connect it here a little bit. When we talk about bacteria, it's different in all aspects of our body. We've been talking about gut bacteria, but the vaginal canal has this beautiful species of bacteria that's designed and is there for us to reproduce. And so that's where the connection is. We're like, wait, how did we get there? It's still bacteria, just different parts of the body.
Yeah, and here's the connection. So there's 5 main strains of bacteria that exist in a healthy vaginal canal, right? And these 5 strains should be the predominant bacteria in a healthy vaginal canal. And the studies that show that if you don't have a dominance of these 5 strains, it dramatically affects the fertility, the ability to create child, and basically release an egg to get fertilized and for the egg to stick, and so on. So women who suffer from bacterial vaginosis, which is a dysbiosis in the vaginal canal.
Too much bad, not enough good.
Too much bad, not enough of those 5 good, especially. They have a much lower rate of fertility, and then if they happen to get pregnant, they also have almost twice the chance of not seeing the pregnancy through the course. They have 4 times the risk of preterm birth just from bacterial vaginosis, just from not having the right bacteria in the vaginal canal, which is crazy to think. We didn't think that the bacteria had anything to do with our ability to make baby.
But it's like your body can evaluate and be like, listen, it's not there. What we need is not there. We're not going to be able to drop the egg. We're not going to be able to carry the egg. It's just not there.
Right.
I mean, the body is fascinating, but this emotional element it's tragic.
And again, that goes back to my whole explanation of the holobiome, right? So it's these little microecologies that have to communicate and work together in order to perpetuate the wellness and the functionality of the whole. So your microecology in the vaginal canal controls your ovaries and all of these other components that are required in order to have a successful pregnancy. And those things have to communicate. If you don't have that healthy ecology, it doesn't work. Now, the healthy ecology in the vaginal canal is controlled by healthy ecology in the gut. Here's how it does it. So there's a constellation of bacteria in the gut of women called estrobolome, right? Estrobolome is like this constellation of a bunch of bacteria together. One of their main jobs is to metabolize estrogen. So when estrogen is being released, these bacteria metabolize estrogen to its counterparts. Those counterparts make it into the circulatory system, and through the circulatory system, they end up in the vaginal mucosa. Those metabolites of estrogen feed those 5 key strains that you need to have flourishing in your vaginal canal in order to experience successful pregnancy and successful fertility. So it's your gut bacteria that are producing compounds that feed your vaginal bacteria, and then your vaginal bacteria helps you get pregnant and hold the pregnancy. It's an amazing connection.
It's fascinating.
Now, if you don't have enough estrobolome, you're not producing those metabolites, which actually increase fertility and success rate of the pregnancy. But you also end up with estrogen dominance because you're not getting rid of estrogen. We know that there are numerous conditions that are associated with estrogen dominance, including numerous cancers.
Right.
Breast cancer,
female reproductive cancer, all of those.
Reproductive cancer, endometriosis, all of these crazy things. All of those are due to estrogen dominance because you don't have this diverse constellation of bacteria breaking down estrogen into its usable components and feeding those bacteria, and instead now you have an overabundance of estrogen in the rest of the system. So it's all connected and it's all run by microbes, and if you don't have the right microbes, it all breaks down. Which is
so fascinating. And we're learning so much, right? For so long, we thought genes regulated this type of thing. Mm-hmm. And then after the Human Genome Project, we're like, it's not genes.
No.
It's these microbes.
It's the microbes. Yeah, and you think about our ancestors, right? Like I think about my grandma, my dad's mom. She's a tiny 4'9" little Chinese lady, right? Oh. So she grew up in Malaysia and I think part in India, but she was adopted from China by an Indian family. So she was raised essentially Indian. So it's funny to see her when she was alive because she's a tiny little Chinese lady that only wears saris and speaks Indian languages, right? That tiny little frail looking lady put out 13 babies, right? And many, many women in that generation put out so many babies. They were so fertile and had the capacity to just keep getting pregnant one after the other and have these easy pregnancies. I mean, they weren't going for ultrasounds every week and doing all these genetic testing and all this stuff. They didn't have fancy hospitals to give birth in. Most of them were giving birth at home. Their systems work so well because they lived in a less toxic environment. Yeah. They lived in the earth. She lived in a village. They ate food from their garden, from the ground. When they got animals, it was because some guy brought by a pig and they slaughtered the animal right there in their own home and they ate all components of it. These weren't processed foods with glyphosate on it and all that, and they had the capability of just popping out babies like that, which is fascinating to me. When I look at her, I go, how did this tiny little lady pop out 13 babies, right? And she did. and she lived till she was 80 something years old.
And it's cool too, because part of her through these babies is part of you, right?
Absolutely.
This system that we have comes from, that's another intuitive thing. Like, I feel very intuitively connected to my ancestors. I've been doing family history. I want to know more about them. Right? And then we talk about these different ancestors and what their microbiome looked like and how it affects my microbiome. And again, it's just this connection that I felt was intuitively there that now scientifically we're proving is there.
Absolutely. And the biggest connection I have with my grandma is the microbes. It's not the genetics necessarily, because every time there was a marriage and a new child was born, there was a mixing of genetics, right? You get 50-50 from another family source. But my biggest connection with her is because she passed down her microbiome, to my dad, and I picked up a bunch of his microbes after I was born. Now, my stronger connection is with my mom's mom, because the microbes from your mom's side is the predominant ones that you end up getting.
Both from breast milk and the vaginal canal.
And the vaginal canal. But yeah, it's absolutely fascinating.
So 13 kids for you. I mean, it's passed down.
Yes, I'm on it. No, we have 2, and I don't know how she did it. It's insane. The modern world is way too.
I have 4, and I'm good with
You're a saint. I don't know how you did 4, but yeah, when you look at the fertility rates and in 2-3 generations ago, their ability to get pregnant and have babies with less complication is actually quite fascinating. That even though we're in the age of modern medicine, it is harder for women to get pregnant today. It is harder for women to sustain a pregnancy, and it's harder to have a non-complicated pregnancy nowadays than it has been for centuries before. A lot of that is due to the types of environments that we're exposing ourselves to. Now that we know that bacteria control so much of that, it makes total sense. We've been doing nothing but trying to kill bacteria for the last 50 years, right? All of the household cleaning products say it kills 99.9%.
Because we were afraid of them.
We were afraid of them.
Yeah.
When you look at it from a microbiology standpoint, at the most exaggerated sense, less than 1% of any bacteria, of all bacteria that have been discovered, are pathogenic or harmful. Yeah. The vast majority of bacteria that ever been discovered are benign or actually beneficial.
And I love hearing that, right? To me, that makes more sense to me.
Absolutely.
That this environment that I'm around is designed to help me, not to hurt me.
Right.
It's the chemicals, the toxin, I don't know. For me, I'm like, it's humans that came in and did a lot of this stuff. And
we are adulterating nature, and that's
and
one
when we
of the
know,
biggest problems.
And this is the other thing too. We talked about this yesterday. It's kind of like when we know better, we can do better.
Exactly.
And there's certain elements where you're like, okay, we know better. Now, I also feel like there's conspiring men and companies and whatever. By men, I mean men and women, right? But there is an element of for profit only, I don't care, and so we do kind of want to rally together when we know better, that we're like, no, we know better and we're going to do better.
Right.
Like we're going to create some change.
We are, and this is our power as individuals, right? It's going to be hard for us to go and make changes in the controlling mechanisms of the world around us, but we can make those choices as humans. So we know, for example, eventually the more people choose organic because they're not using the herbicides and pesticides, the glyphosate and all that on the organic products. The more people choose organic, eventually that stuff will be out of our system.
I want them to know that, right? We did mention that organic still is exposed to that. But your toxic load from organic is significantly less than your toxic load from conventional. Well, so we still want you eating those foods.
Absolutely. Well, and also the organic food themselves tend to be more nutritious because they, one of the things that we know is our modern day crops, vegetables, plants, and all that are devoid of most of the nutritional qualities that they used to have because of the farming practices. But we know that organic gets you closer to what it used to be like. An organic orange will have higher amounts of vitamin C than a non-organic orange.
And people love to argue that with me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there was a paper that was published, and they're like, oh no, they're the same. They're not the same. And so I have empathy for people that are like, listen, organic's expensive. I get it. I've got 4 kids. It's not like I can afford organic all the time. So what I found, I went to the farmer's market and I started talking to just a few farmers, and I'm like, are you certified organic? Well, their response to me was, do you know how expensive it is to be certified organic? But they said, we are practically, if we didn't have to spend the money, so he'll list off, we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this. He's like, I feel like we're safer than 99% of the stuff out there. So all of a sudden I was like, just talking to this farmer, like my bags, I came home and I was like, I just felt like I'd done something good for myself that day,
totally.
right?
And in fact, there's a step better than organic. That's biodynamic farming. Biodynamic farming is all about bringing life back into the soil as well, and that's actually even better than organic. And a lot of your farmers markets, local farmers, will be doing biodynamic farming without the whole expense of getting the USDA organic certification, which is actually even better. Now, all of this stuff, it has interesting labels, biodynamic, organic, all of that stuff. Really, at the end of the day, that's just normal farming, you know?
Right.
It used to be just farming, right?
In our backyard.
In our backyard. That's what people used to do.
Plot of land.
Exactly. That's what people used to do from the dawn of the agriculture age, when humans started to grow their own food. They were doing what we now call fancy organic and biodynamic. It's that we went and bastardized the whole idea of farming about 50, 60 years ago by introducing GMOs and chemicals and these massive, factory farms and big agro business and so on. We've basically polluted it. But a lot of your local farmers, even though they're not organic certified, are doing biodynamic type of farming, which means that their food is way more nutrient dense than not. Now, it still may contain glyphosate on it, but the more of us that keep choosing organic and clean and biodynamic supporting these farmers, the less and less of that stuff will be used in our environment, and the faster we'll get to the point where that stuff is outside of our environment. So we may not be doing it for ourselves, but think about doing it for your kids and their kids, because eventually their kids will be in an environment, hopefully, that hasn't seen glyphosate for a decade. And it's clean, right?
Yeah.
And they can live a little bit healthier. They can live a little bit better. They won't have all of these, behavioral disorders. They won't have all these mental, cognitive issues. They won't have long-term aging issues. I mean, the poor brain, all the stuff it's suffering from. We see all of these scary, news articles of people going crazy and doing crazy things. So much of that is just the toxicity in our environment, and how it affects cognitive function. And there's so much data on all of that. So it really can't be argued anymore.
Right.
If people are arguing it means they have some sort of incentive, a financial incentive to stay with the status quo. Because there are a lot of people that make a lot of money from the way things are done at the moment.
Sad.
And very few people make money from you choosing to go to your farmer's market and buy the produce there, or even better, to some degree, growing your own stuff at your own home. So there's all of these forces pulling against that kind of stuff.
So here are things that you guys can do. Hopefully you've maybe taken some notes, right? Being smart with your purchasing of your food. Do the best you can, right? I do sometimes when I would teach classes, people would ask me about the whole organic question. Here's my take on it. Do the best you can. Please still eat fruits and vegetables, right? Because sometimes I can't afford the organic, therefore I'm so afraid of even a conventional apple. I'm not gonna eat the conventional apple.
Right.
I'm safer with the Dorito bag. You're not safer with the Dorito bag. So do the best you can with the food. Take a good probiotic. Like Spore Biotics, look at the ones. Silver Fern brand has the research, has the science, has the strains are important. That's something that you can do. We didn't really talk about water. I like trying to get a water filter if you can. There's a lot of toxins in your water. What else? What other actionable things?
Increase the diversity of your diet. So every week try to include a food which is a plant-based food, like a vegetable or fruit that you've never tried before or you have seldom eaten, and just kind of include it in your diet, just to give you a little bit of diversity. Try to add in some fasting, because those fasting hours are really important.
Fiber would be another one. We didn't really talk about fiber. For so long we thought fiber was this undigested food starch that just kind of went through us, which it is. But what we now know is that fiber, through this amazing process that happens in your body, actually feeds bacteria. So that's another huge problem, at least in this country, is we're fiber deficient.
There's a side on that. Make sure if you're increasing your fiber intake or taking a fiber supplement, to add the probiotics to it, because the only way fiber is beneficial is if it's converted by certain types of good bacteria in your large bowel into something called short-chain fatty acids. Now, you have bad bacteria that will eat the fiber and convert it into gas. That's why a lot of people will get bloating and all that if they start adding a lot of fiber. The strains that are in the Silver Fern probiotic, we did a study to show that it almost doubles the amount of short-chain fatty acid production from fiber.
And short-chain fatty acids, that might sound like a bad word. You want a lot of those in your body, and you need two things: the right good bacteria and the proper amount of fiber, and those will convert through a fermentation process.
And just a couple of thoughts on short-chain fatty acids. Those intestinal cells that we talked about that basically separate you from the toxic world outside in your blood system, those cells feed primarily on short-chain fatty acids.
So when we're talking leaky gut, and you're like, I've got leaky gut, my doctor talked to me about SIBO, which we didn't even get into SIBO on this, but when you're like, well, what can I do? Like, I've got this leaky gut. I mean, he just explained to it. That's short-chain fatty acids. So probiotic creates that environment to have the healthy bacteria, plus the fiber will then create those short-chain fatty acids that will help those tight junctions.
The other fun things that short-chain fatty acids do, like butyrate, enhances fat burn, improves satiety, so it totally changes your metabolism. It actually increases your body's ability to burn fat for energy rather than crave and need sugar. It reduces the response to the hunger hormone.
Also, people are like, wait, what is this again?
Yeah,
fiber.
Exactly.
Yes, fiber
does this. We're actually doing a study on it. The other, we're doing a beauty study on it because we're studying how our spores, when you added them to fiber and the production of short-chain fatty acids, how that impacts the skin. So we're actually looking at the lipidome, which is the types of fats that you have in your skin. We're looking at the sebum quality. We're looking at the appearance of the skin. We know that certain fibers have actually been shown to reduce the appearance of wrinkles and improve the hydration of the skin. So all of that comes from these short-chain fatty acids being produced in the gut that are then utilized by your skin cells. So these short-chain fatty acids are like these amazing life-giving molecules that our body can't create. We need the bacteria to create them. You have to have the good bacteria, and then you have to give them the fiber to do it.
Okay, so I gotta interrupt because here's why I'm smiling over here. This is how we create product at Silverfern. He tells me these stories, and I'm like, I want that.
Yes.
I want that. Can we create that? How do we create that? What does it look like? What does the science show? What's the dosage that we need? What can we say about this? Will it really affect my skin? All this stuff. And then he does it, and then we've got a beauty biotic. Or I mean, this is the process, and I love it. I love it.
And a lot of this stuff, it's things that I'm thinking about that could potentially have an impact. And then we do a study. You know, we don't mess around. Like the impact on the skin, we're doing a study with University of California, Davis with their dermatology department. You know, we're not just going, hey, this should work, and let's create some fancy marketing
behind
this.
Let's throw it in a gummy and sell it as this.
Exactly. And here's a beautiful name and a look to the product and all that. We go, no, this should work, but let's verify it with some science. And then if it does work, let's create a product. You know, and that's kind of how it should go. That's not how it goes in the supplement industry. But that's one tip. I went aside. So the fiber increase. The other thing would be your home, your environment around you, right? You don't need to sterilize your home. So if you're using chlorine-based cleaners, the stuff that says kills 99.9% of bacteria, the bleach, that stuff is extremely disruptive and destructive to your microbiome and those of your kids. Studies that show that households that use chlorine-based cleaners have kids with a much higher incidence rate of viral infections and asthma and allergies and other immune dysfunctions. We don't need to live in a sterile home. It doesn't, that's all bleachy smell is not the smell of clean, it's a smell of illness. So think about that.
Crazy,
right?
I mean, it's crazy. I feel I'm gonna email all my friends. I'm like, please just watch this. Because we didn't know. Again, when we know better, we can do better. We didn't know.
We didn't know. We thought that's what we had to do. Now, the way I clean my house, for example, is I have a squirt bottle of water, and I put a few drops of some sort of essential oil in there just for smell, and then we spray the surfaces and wipe it down. That's it. Now, of course, your toilet, maybe if someone had a problem, you want to use a toilet cleaner, you can do that. That's fine. Or if the grouts in your shower are getting a little dirty, you want to clean them once or twice with something, that's fine as well.
Well, there's companies now. I mean, I use a brand right now that there's companies out there.
That make safer household cleaners. Absolutely. But for the most part, for most surfaces in your house, you just need to kind of just give them a wipe down with a little bit of water. You don't have to sterilize them. Of course, if you have a raw chicken that you brought home and you open it out on your counter and you're cutting it up and the juices from the raw chicken everywhere, you might want to sterilize that because there's probably salmonella everywhere. But outside of that, you really don't have to sterilize your environment. So I actually, for those rare moments that you do have to sterilize an area because of a known contamination, I have one thing of these kind of Lysol wipes, which are an antimicrobial wipe, and we keep them. And in fact, most of the time we go, oh, where are those Lysol wipes? We open it and look, and they're all dried out because we haven't used them in a year, you know, but we have them there just in case. Yeah. So every once in a while you may need to do that, but in general you don't have to sterilize your home, nor should you. Get a dog.
Yeah. Or go to the petting zoo, or let your kids be, you know, licked by a dog, which for me, before I had a dog, I was like, that's disgusting. Right. Now that I have a dog, okay. Yeah, so do that. Hug more, interact.
Yeah, interact more.
And that's something we talked about too, like just this lack of what I feel like just human connection even. My kids will be texting their friends, and you're like, science has now shown actually being around them
being connected
is more beneficial than them texting them.
Right, has that impact, has actually a hormonal change in your system, and that's measurable. If you look at old cultures, European cultures and all that, when they see each other, they kiss, right, on the cheeks, and there is a component to that, that's a sense of community, sense of belonging, a way of exchanging with one another that actually does improve hormonal response in the body, which has longevity associated with it, right?
We're going to kiss everyone at Silverfern today.
Absolutely, policy. Kissing policy. Yeah. Oh, HR might have trouble with that, because some people get a lot more kisses than others. But those are, again, some tips.
Just things that we can do.
Simple things you can do, you know, and then be really cognizant of your personal care items. You know, there are so many companies now that are offering these cleaner label personal care products, the lotions and the shampoos and soaps and things like that you use on a daily basis. Be really cognizant of the stuff that you're using, because all of those chemicals that you put on your system do get absorbed through your skin.
Which is your largest organ. We forget sometimes.
We do.
We take such care on other stuff. I'm just as much to blame, right? I take such vigilance in other things, and then I'm like, oh, what is this in my hotel lotion, right? And I don't even think about it.
And you use it, right? And or if you look like, you know, my wife broke out with hives recently for a few days, which is terrible, and she used like this old weird bath soap that we had in this, probably grew mold in it, and she's sensitive to mold, so she did, and all those like the watermelon scented stuff and all this. You gotta get rid of all of that stuff. It's really simple. So I try to use, for example, I use soaps that were like handmade soaps that you can find in really cool little artisan stores that some lady made, and it's just a surfactant, which is like usually a fat-based thing that she's used some sort of wax to put it together, and it's enough to clean your surface. Again, your skin is a living organism. It does not need to be sterilized. So, you know, when you look at your skin, you see skin cells, right? That's what gives you that's what the pigment and all that you can see. For every one skin cell on your skin, there are 35 bacteria cells, right? So we are covered with microbes, and when you screw up those microbes, you end up with eczema, acne, psoriasis, dryness of the skin, aging, all of these crazy things, because you're killing those bacteria on your skin. So you want to be really cognizant that you are walking, talking rainforest, and you don't want to pollute and toxify your rainforest. Anything that you wouldn't put in your potted plants to feed them, don't put on your skin, right? That's a simple way to think about it. If you're a person that loves plants and flowers, and you have a bunch of plants around your house, which is a great thing, you wouldn't take your shampoo and pour it in the plant because you know it's probably going to kill it. If you're not confident in that shampoo that it would not kill your plant, don't use it on your head, right? So, because all that stuff gets into your system.
And it seems overwhelming at first, but here's the cool thing. Once you buy the shampoo, you don't think about it again, right? Once you buy the lotion, it's just on your counter. So I know sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming.
Yeah.
So just take little steps, little tiny things, an actual step that you can take today that you're like, okay. And it's empowering once you do.
Yeah.
Like you're like, okay, this is, you feel like, okay, you have a choice.
You do, and it's a cascading effect. Once you start doing one of those changes, you'll start feeling different, and your dopamine will start kicking in and go, that's a rewarding change. So when you make those choices, your body will tell you that's a positive thing. Just like how our hunter-gatherer tribes realize that doing the disgusting thing of opening an animal's intestines and eating it is a beneficial thing, there's a dopamine response to that, right? And so that dopamine response tells you that what you're doing is beneficial. And so keep doing it and keep adding steps on a monthly, weekly basis. You'll get an amazing cumulative effect. That cumulative effect will change your life. And here's the last tip, which I think is really important, and maybe not the last because you might come up with something else, but my last tip is make sure everyone around you is doing it as well. Because remember, we talked about it, if you're the only health advocate in your household and you're doing all this stuff for yourself, or you're advocating for someone else's health and you're doing it for them, if you're not doing it yourself or other people in the household aren't doing it, they are actually negatively affecting your microbiome based on that study that was done on the people using antibiotics. So it should be a family affair, it should be a household affair. Or if you're 20-something and you have a roommate, go, hey, roommate, stop drinking Mountain Dew. Let's make a choice together and make it a project you do together, right?
Let's hug.
Yeah, let's hug. When I see each other, even though you're driving me crazy for whatever reason because you leave the pizza box out, let's hug it out.
That's a good tip. You know? And with families, I mean, sometimes it's tricky. And I personally, I mean, I've got 4 teenagers, so they are in some ways easier to educate, in other ways significantly harder to educate. Or some people might have a spouse that's like, I don't want to listen. Sometimes have them watch this, because sometimes it feels like it's easier if they hear it from somebody else, not from me, not from mom or whatever. And again, just start with those small little steps, and positive change can become addictive in a sense, where you're like, it's the dopamine, right? I need it.
Dopamine,
And anyway, so it does get easier, where it doesn't take as much thought and effort.
So here's what's funny about all of this. I think when we started, we were saying, let's record a couple of short videos.
I know.
Right?
Now it's going to be this
I'm sure it's going to be like 9 hours long at the end of it.
I know.
But we have so much more that we can
I mean,
address.
I know. I thought we haven't talked about SIBO. We haven't talked about brain, mood, anxiety, all of those things. We haven't talked about addiction, how GABA, the gut is affected to your ability to release. I mean, there's so much more so we'll do more.
Which means we just have to do more.
We just have to do more.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining. For whoever has stuck through, thank you so much. I'll put a discount code somewhere at some point to thank you for sticking with us.
And thank you for sharing it, if you do share it with people.
Yeah.
And look for the next one, because we're going to do this more.
Yeah, we'll do more.
It's just going to be a casual health conversation, because this is the stuff we talk about anyway. If Charity and I go to dinner, we're not talking about others. We're talking about this, right? This is how nerdy and weird we are. This is what we're talking about in our normal thing. And people who are sitting around always go, this is amazing information. So do it on camera.
Yeah.
And that's the purpose of this.
So share it.
Right?
Let people know, because I feel like to have effective change, it's one thing for me to do it individually. It's better for me to do it, like we said, in a family. But it's really actually best for us to do it as a society, because, I mean, we won't even get into the social impact of feeling like you belong. You don't want to be the crazy person that doesn't use antimicrobial soaps, right? You want to have this kind of sense of belonging. And the more we share, the better that we can do to make kind of effective change. So thanks everybody.
Thanks,
Kiran.